Yeah, it always sounds very pretentious if you call your album a concept album, but in this case it's really true, unfortunately, because I had this concept of finding a dramaturgical phrasing throughout the whole album, to have one mythological circle of fairy tale creatures, of mythological creatures, the mermaids, the sirens, the rusalkas, and showing this mythological creature from the various cultural areas that have produced these fairy tales and these myths, and it reaches from the ancient Greeks throughout Central Europe to the Slavic cultures. Every single culture actually has a mermaid creature, and that's why it was so important to me to have various languages and various eras, various epochs on this album. We start off with John Dowland with the English Renaissance, this wonderful period of Elizabethan Jacobean songs, and then we go through to the classical period, Haydn, then Schubert, then the late Romantic period with Wolf, move into the French Impressionist period, Debussy, and then later on Honegger, which is already early modern times. And then we even found some early 20th century Slavic repertoire. Dvorak even composed an opera called Rusalka, based on the Andersen fairy tale, which we used. We used one very famous aria from this album, from this opera. And then we even found the songs of the fairy tale princess by Szymanowski in Polish. So I think we've managed to uncover or cover a lot of ground in this album. So the title of this album is Sirène. We chose the French version of a word that is international recognizable. I mean, you have internationally recognizable. We have the siren in the English language. We have Sirene in German, La Sirène in French. It's a very, we chose this international title so that everybody would understand what we mean, that it actually really comes from this mermaid idea. But we didn't want to want it to be too cute. If it were called The Little Mermaid, then everybody would probably think of Disney and Ariel, and this is definitely not the case, because this is not a cutie fairy tale. It's a very, like fairy tales often are, brutal story by Hans Christian Andersen about a very vulnerable sea creature, this mermaid that comes out of the water and leaves her environment, her family, and gets bewitched by this witch, the sea witch, and she separates her fishtail into two legs, which is incredibly painful, which makes her every step excruciatingly painful for her, and the witch cuts out her tongue so she can't sing or speak anymore, and the singing voice was actually the thing that the prince fell in love with. So on the one hand, she wants to make herself more human through these frightful operations, but then on the other hand, she loses all the aspects that have made her lovable, which is her fairy-like existence and her voice, which is the main thing. That's why it's also quite fitting, I think, this title, because I wanted to, in a way, create a female parallel to Orpheus, the Greek male singer, the very first probably singer in human history, who lured the shadows and the ghosts away from his beloved Eurydice down in the Styx in the underworld, to free his beloved, and which is a very positive figure. And the siren might be the Greek parallel as a female figure that lures men particularly into her grasp. Funnily enough, the female figure is a very negative one, because the ships that come into her vicinity break and crash against the rocks, and the seafarers perish, and that's actually very sad. So I thought this would be quite an interesting character. This whole idea about the sirens and the mermaids came to pass because I got this request from the Musikverein in Vienna to design a program according to the wonderful Austrian writer Michael Köhlmeier, who is famous for telling stories according to myths or fairy tales. Greek myths. He has a radio show and everything, and has published CDs, and he also does it live. So we, my pianist Eric Schneider and I were designated to design this program around his storytelling. We were actually supposed to choose various or design the program around various fairy tales, and the funny thing is we found most repertoire, most material for the Little Mermaid, and not so much for the Little Matchstick Girl or the Ugly Duckling, but mostly for the Little Mermaid. And then I thought, well, why don't we do a whole program around this? And the great thing is that I've actually been fascinated by this creature for a very, very long time. I grew up close to the lake in Hindorf am Wallersee near Salzburg, in a 350-year-old little wooden house just right by the lake. My first production in the music college was Pélias and Mélisande. Mélisande is also a kind of sea nymph or lake nymph, naiad. And my first production at the Salzburg Festival was a wood sprite. My first role was the wood sprite in Rusalka. So this fairy tale has actually pursued me throughout my career in a way, or throughout my life, and I'm really glad that I could feed off these emotions and these images that I had in my head of these also the nature surrounding this figure, but also the emotions and the sadness, the deep sadness that is within this creature that wants to become a human being but can't, and sings her sad song, and it gets actually carried throughout the water. So and across the water and to the to men, to humans, and then the prince falls in love with her, and it's all an incredibly tragic story. And yeah, it's always fascinated me a lot. I'd like to talk about my working relationship with Eric Schneider. It was actually a godsend. I mean, we got to know each other working together at the music college, Hans Eisler, on this project, Pélias and Mélisande, but we completely lost touch. And then he phoned me one day, a couple of years ago, and said, why don't we work together? Why don't we just see how it works between us? And we started developing this really intense and very easygoing, but also very hardworking relationship, where we really also able to criticize each other. I mean, he's obviously got much more experience. He knows this whole kind of lead repertoire maybe a lot better, a lot deeper. But on the other hand, I think I have quite good instincts, and I've also got the feeling that I'm allowed to say something also, or maybe even insist on certain ideas that I might have, because he's not so much of a teacher figure for me, but he's more of a partner, which is also wonderful. On the one hand, I totally respect him and his amazing technical and artistic abilities, but he's also a wonderful partner to work with. I don't feel inferior to him, which is very, very important, especially if you're working with an older musical partner, I think. Sometimes I feel a little intimidated, but not with him. It's really the ideal mixture. We both kind of came up with these ideas for the album, for the program. I did a lot of surfing on the internet. I've mainly through the lyrics, through the text, and then I listened to the music. And because for me it was so important to have the storyline in there. Eric knew or knows so much repertoire that he could just come up with songs out of the top of his head. And we also spent whole afternoons in the library looking for, maybe if we said, well, we really want a piece in a Slavic language, or we really want a modern piece, we really had to sort of search and look for the stuff, or we really want more early music or something. So yeah, we spent quite a lot of time in libraries as well, but also just at home at the computer. It can also be a very lonely but very in-depth and very interesting task. And it's also so much fun just to like email with one another and just come up with ideas in the middle of the night, and then the other person answers and stuff. So it's, yeah, there's really been a very vivid and avid communication between us. And yeah, the recording took place in Cologne in the Deutschlandfunk building, they have a fantastic chamber music hall there, and it was during the World Cup, and all of us actually, also the so Eric and me, and also the technicians, the recording technicians, were great football fans, and they were so delighted when they found out that I was too. So then I said, well, why don't we put the break at 4 o'clock in the afternoon so that we can watch the first match and have lunch basically at 4, and then we finish at 8 so we can watch the second match at 8:30, and then we all used to go to the beer garden, and yeah, so it was a really, really great atmosphere during this recording. We had a lot of fun in the breaks and the intervals, but also that gave us the kind of the passion, and also the freedom to then be incredibly in-depth and concentrated and emotional, and also technically, hopefully, close to perfect. We always want to be perfect musicians, don't we? I don't think we reached it, but maybe we did in some places. So yeah, it was just the ideal combination of extreme fun and laughter and easygoingness, and also this very intense and emotional and deep work. So yeah. Well, it was terribly exciting for me today because it was my very first video clip shooting. Like, this whole fantastic, amazingly professional, wonderful team was there just for me and for this video clip, which is I think quite a modern and new medium for classical music, and I'm so glad that it's starting to flourish in classical music as well, because you can tell such wonderful stories with film. I'm a huge film fan myself, and a huge dream came true for me to wear historical costumes and walk around in this beautiful, very unpretentious landscape actually here in the north of Berlin. This beautiful lake. There's a little house here, a little hut actually with a pier on the outside, which leads into the water. We had shots where we walked into the water. It's actually pretty freezing because it's still spring here, which means just past winter here in Berlin. And yeah, and we chose the piece Des Fischers Liebesglück by Franz Schubert, because it's, in a way, for me and Eric, I think it was the heart of the album, or the heart of the concert program, because it's very typical for Schubert on the one hand, although it's not a well-known piece. It's incredibly beautiful, not well-known. Nobody knows why. I think people just look at the first two Schubert albums and don't look beyond, and it's always great to go through the whole of Schubert's Lied oeuvre, 600 and something songs, but whatever, because you always find a little pearl. There we are again with pearls and, you know, the mermaid again. But yeah, and we chose this song because it captures this Schubertian folk music tone in simple harmonies, but then all of a sudden might make very daring modulations and daring jumps into a practically Brahmsian modernness, which I wouldn't have expected playing through the piece. And the poem really, really touched us even more and more. The more we rehearsed it, the more we recorded it. We found deeper, more metaphysical meanings within this, like imagining that this starry, star-spangled sky is reflected in the water, and then the poet Leitner describes the way the boat actually sails through this this mass of stars. Instead of actually seeing the stars in the skies, they're actually in the water, and the boat is diving into the stars, and it's just a very, very simple but very metaphysical concept. And then on the other hand, it's a very simple story of a young man, a fisherman, that sees the light in his lover's, his mistress's house being reflected in the water, and this incredible excitement, this joy, this expectancy, him looking forward to seeing his lover and being able to meet with her, maybe even for the first time on their own. You never know, you know, in these earlier times it's quite difficult. And so he waits for her and takes her hand and leads her into the boat. She comes rushing down, and it describes her beautifully in this poem. And then they're just alone. They're surrounded by the nightly mist above the lake, which it's very erotic. It's like arms enclosing you, and for the first time they have a moment of intimacy. Then the poet describes the first kiss between them. It's just all incredibly intimate, and for me it was so important, and that's why it's nice as an opener for people. It's not the first piece on the album, but maybe the first piece that people hear if they see this video, because it shows the moment and this state where the relationship between the man and the woman is still intact and is still harmonious and is still full of expectancy and full of joy and not destroyed by any unwanted conflict. And that was really the main thing about this piece. And it's just an incredibly wistful and sad song, but it's a very joyous and beautiful and happy text. So I also loved this discrepancy between music and text as well. So yeah.